But one of our reasons and one of our invitations to come here tonight was so you could hear from Jordan, who is bridged to Malawi. And Jordan, start making your way up here. And how this first happened for Potter's Clay is Ed's family and Jordan's family have been friends for many years. Jordan's dad's a pastor in Calgary. And Ed came to the group one night and told us about this ministry that this young guy had started in Malawi. And it kind of caught our hearts, and we don't take anything from the group. It's whatever comes in goes back into the group. And we had never sponsored something that we felt was something good to sponsor. And you know, if you're in a music group, some of you have been, you don't have a lot of extra money around. But we decided to kind of cut money from Potter's Clay. No, I'm not touching it. Oh, they're giving me instructions over here. Elliot can be kind of bossy sometimes. But they kept, anyway, we decided that we would, everywhere we went, we'd have a little bucket, and we would support this ministry. And Jordan told us, everything you raise in that little bucket's going to go right to the kids. And so we took it on, and God has blessed us for that. And I think that little bucket, we've brought in close to $40,000, have we not? Maybe even a little above that. It's hard to believe. And
I think it's actually closer to 50 or 60,000.
Wow. So we are excited about this. We wanted you to hear about it, and so we're here tonight to support Jordan.
Good evening. As we say in Malawi, Maswala Bwanji. How is your day? So, thank you so much for the opportunity to be speaking to you this evening and sharing a little bit about what I do. It's been a few years since I've been here, and thank you for this opportunity, because I know there's all sorts of things you can be doing on a Sunday night. And myself, I like to rest on a Sunday night, but it's great to come out into the house of the Lord, hear some great music, sing some praises to God, and hear what He has to say. A little bit about myself. Actually, if you want to start passing out those envelopes now while I'm talking, that's probably the easiest. 14 years ago, I went to Malawi with my Bible college. We actually did a tour through southern Africa, through South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Mozambique, and back down. And God really just spoke to my heart and let me know that Africa was where He wanted me to be. And when I got to Malawi, some missionaries that were already on the field there invited me to come back and work as their music director at a church that they had planted. Now, they planted this church in what used to be, an auto mechanic shop, like a garage. And they converted it into a small church, and there was about 11 people in this church, and then it began to grow and began to grow. And I watched over the years as it grew from 11 people to almost 500 people, and God began to work with that. And the amazing thing about how this church started was it started as reaching out to prostitutes and children who lived on the streets in Malawi. Now, part of my role was making sure that, well, I looked after the music on Sundays, but also making sure that these kids on the streets came in, had a bite to eat, were going to school, getting an opportunity for a shower. You see, these kids didn't have anywhere to live. They lived on the streets. Now, being in a big church, you know there's always people that can take over that role, and you don't have to do that for a long time. And it wasn't exactly what God had put on my heart to do, and I didn't know what God had in store for me, and I began to pray. And I prayed and prayed, Lord, what do you have for me? And I did some volunteer work at a pharmacy and a clinic in Malawi. I worked with a couple orphanages. And one night I just went to bed. I said, God, I thank you so much for this opportunity. Now this is 2 years after I had first gone to Malawi. I said, Lord, thanks for the opportunity to do this, but it seems like I'm not quite doing exactly what you want me to do. And can you just give me some direction? And just very, very clearly, Lord, if you want me to start something new, I'll start something new. If you want me to work with somebody, I'll work with somebody. But please just tell me what you want me to do. And I went to sleep, and I had a dream. And it's one of those dreams that you know it's a God dream. It's not something that your own brain can cook up. And I saw in this dream 1,000 orphans receiving vocational training. And it was very clear, and I was just right there. And I woke up and I went, whoa, Lord, I don't know how to do that. I studied theology. I have no idea how to train orphans in a whole bunch of trades. And God said, simply start by feeding them. So I did. I went back to Canada. I paid off my student loans, sold a lot of what I had, put some of it into storage, took 2 suitcases, and went to Africa. And in November of 2007, I registered Kids World Outreach Society in Malawi. We call it Bridge to Malawi here in Canada, because Kids World Outreach Society in Calgary works with inner city children in Calgary. But so that you know all the money is going to Malawi, we call it Bridge to Malawi. Now, when I met with the chiefs, God opened up the door for me to go into a very remote part of Malawi. By remote, it wasn't necessarily far, it was just really hard to get to. 67 kilometers outside of the nearest major center, down a dirt road, and it's not a dirt road by any Canadian standards. It's not flat. It's full of sharp rocks and pits, and you have to drive through 4 rivers. There's no bridges. You actually have to drive through 4 rivers to get to this campus. And a lot of the kids there had never seen a white person before and ran in terror when they saw me, because the rumors were that white people are white because they don't have enough blood and they're coming to take yours. So they took off and disappeared. And it was 3 weeks before a kid would even shake my hand. But in that 3 weeks, I met with the local chiefs and I said, this is what I would like to do. I'd like to start a feeding program. Make sure that the orphans in your community are looked after. And the chief said, in Chichewa, he didn't speak English. I didn't even know he could speak English. For 2 years, he wouldn't speak English to me. Little did I know he was university educated and completely fluent in it, but he refused. So through an interpreter, I found out that many people come into this part of Malawi and say they were going to do what you say you want to do, and they leave after a few months. I said, well, I won't. What can I do to show you? And he said, well, do what you say you're going to do, and we'll see how it goes. I said, is there any way I can have a piece of land to build a feeding center? He said, no, I'm not giving you anything until you show me you're going to do what you say you're going to do. So starting under a tree next to his house, in Malawi's hot season, it was 45 degrees, I hired 3 local pastors' wives, and they cooked, and we were feeding about 70 children. And a year later, we were feeding just over 100 kids, still under that same tree. And the chief came to me and he said, you're doing what you said you would do. Here's some land. And he gave me a ½ acre of land. And I started a small garden, built a feeding center. So 2 years now after we registered, we've got a floor in the feeding center, the roof is up, and we were celebrating the goodness of what God is doing. That was in 2009. Now, 9 years after beginning in November of 2007, we're serving 350 children on a daily basis. They come for breakfast at 6 o'clock, Monday through Saturday. They go to school. We look after their school fees, their clothes, their uniforms, their school books, their medical care. After school at 1 o'clock, they come for lunch. They help to fetch some water, to water the garden, clean up the dishes, get their clothes patched if there's anything that needs to be patched, any first aid that needs to be looked after, they get medical treatment. If any of them are sick, we take them to the hospital, just looking after them completely. And so they get their lunch, and then after lunch, they have an opportunity to do their homework and then take some food home for the evening. 350 kids every day. It's been an amazing journey. I remember in, I have to get the year right here, it was 2012? Yes, 2012. We had had no fuel in the country for a whole year. No petrol, no diesel. I guess petrol, we call it gasoline over here. I'm so used to living that side now. But I remember very clearly saying to God, I cannot spend a week in a queue waiting to get fuel. And I've only got 20 liters left in my drum. Lord, I need you to do something about this. So I have this 200-liter drum, and I laid my hands on it. And I said, I need 80 liters this week. So in Jesus' name, give me 80 liters. And just like the widow in the Old Testament, her cruse of oil never ran out, and her flour never ran out. I tipped out the last 20 liters of diesel from that can, and I got my 80 liters. In addition to that, I was able to help 2 other missionaries with 50 liters each. For 2 months, that drum did not run dry until our president died and we got a new president who got fuel back into the country. God just did something incredible to make sure that we could deliver food to these orphans. I remember praying, Lord, would you help me to trust you? And God said, all right, I will. And week after week, I watched as the bank account balance went all the way down to 0. And I said, okay, God, in all these years, these kids have never gone hungry for lack of money. I trust you. And wouldn't you know, one Sunday, an offering was taken up somewhere in Calgary, and enough money came in to feed the kids for the week. We've always been able to look after their school fees, always been able to look after their food. Never once have they gone hungry. God has provided day after day. This year was a very challenging year for me. For the last 3 years, I've been training a team of young adults from the church where I used to work. And we've been working very closely doing a Sunday school program for these kids. And we get 600 children out every Saturday to our Sunday school because we don't want to compete with the local churches. We offer something on the Saturday. And one of the teachers became a good friend of mine, but he got sick last year, and I remember saying, I said to him, James, what's going on? He said, oh, the doctors say I've got ulcers. I said, okay. So we worked on a diet and helped him to get on an ulcer-friendly diet. He still got worse and worse, and I said, are you sure it's ulcers? He said, well, that's what the doctor says I've got. So I took him to another doctor who said, you have a blockage. You need to go to a specialist. And I took him for a scan, and I was looking at the x-rays. And I said, James, when was the last time that you properly went to the bathroom? He said, about a month ago. He was so completely blocked up. He was in a lot of pain. He had lost a lot of weight because he couldn't eat properly anymore. And we took him to a mission hospital. And when they opened up, because they tried to flush him out, wouldn't work, so they opened him up. And when they opened him up, they found that the blockage was a tumor. And his lymph nodes were already infected. He was 4th stage colorectal cancer, 34 years of age. Had a surgery, was released from hospital about a week later. And a few days later, I got a phone call at 3 a.m. Can you get us back to hospital? So I raced over and got him back into the hospital. I remember sitting beside his bed and holding his hand, and I'm praying for him. And I mean, in my 9 years in Malawi, working with kids in Malawi, I have seen children healed of tuberculosis. I've seen them healed of malaria. I've seen all sorts of wonders done. And so my faith isn't an issue. I'm praying for James, and God dropped something in my heart, and he said, James isn't coming home. I said, what? He said, James is not leaving the hospital. I said, well, that's not fair. You're not supposed to tell me that. How am I supposed to pray? And God said, keep praying because I need to do a work in James' life. So I Now I've got tears running down my face. I pulled my hood over my head so he wouldn't see me, and I put my head down and I just kept praying. And I'm talking to God, and I'm expressing to God that I'm quite angry about this, because there's no reason why this guy can't be healed. And I watched over the next few weeks. I remember staying with him some nights in the hospital, sleeping on the floor next to his bed. And I'd wake up and he'd be talking. I said, "Oh, are you calling me?" He said, "No, Jesus is just here and we're having a discussion." I said, "No. Oh, good." And I prayed, "Lord, leave him alone. Just heal him so we can stop talking to him. Don't take him yet." But I watched, James he didn't have a great relationship with his parents. His dad was working in Rwanda, and he was really angry at his dad, and his mom was mixed up with someone who called themselves a prophet and was just taking money from people. And I watched as his family relationships were healed through this sickness. James' father sat with him for the last 2 weeks of his life, and their relationship was healed. His relationship with his mom was healed. He's related to, I found out later, politicians all around the country. The nurses used to ask, "Who is this guy? Is he some big businessman, big well-known landholder?" I said, "No, he's just a Sunday school worker and he sells clothes in the markets." But big names, political names, heads of political parties came in from all over Malawi to pay tribute to this guy in the hospital. His funeral was incredible. But we brought in our choir from the church, and we stood around his bed and we prayed for him and we sang, and that night 2/3 of the people in the hospital got better and were sent home in the morning. And I thought, this is strange. God, how is this working? He says, "Look at all that I am doing because of this young man's life." And I realized at that moment that God can take the worst of situations where we have incredible sorrow in it and watch as he turns it all around and works it for his good. It was just incredible to see what God did in this circumstance. That's just a glimpse of my year. But one of the most fantastic things is seeing children come to know the saving grace of Jesus Christ. Watching young people like James and his friends every single weekend acting out Bible stories, watching children's faces light up with joy when we arrive in the village, seeing them pray for one another, trusting that God will look after them. Last year, Malawi experienced 3 months worth of rain in 2 weeks. We had now we're a landlocked nation. Mozambique is between us and the Indian Ocean. But there was 2 cyclones came in off the Indian Ocean, one after another, flooded Mozambique and flooded Malawi. 300,000 people lost their homes in just a few days. Crops completely wiped out. And I remember showing up at it was 3 weeks before I could even get to my campus. Despite having a 4x4 with a snorkel, I could not get through all the water to get to the campus because I couldn't see the road and I didn't know what had happened to it. I was not even safe to drive. When I finally got in there, I remember driving through the village and seeing houses of people who I knew were gone, and they were just sitting there on the shell of their roof, faces in their hands, trying to think what they were going to do. My garden was completely wiped out. It was just a mess, the whole place. The feeding center was still standing, so I was really thankful for that. What was incredible, through all that time, our campus was just high enough that it didn't go underwater, and the kids were able to come every day and get food. Now, I looked at our community around us, and I watched as trucks from the United Nations would be coming in and delivering food and supplies, and I watched as Some families would get blankets and pots and pans and oil, and other families would be handed a cup and a spoon and be told, oh, everything is finished. Supplies were being stolen off of trucks before they even got to the people that needed them. And I began to pray, and I said, Lord, in Malawi we say, Mungu waku mamba di mulungu wa mayangu. Our God in heaven is the God who answers prayer. I began to pray, and I said, God, we need to do something about this. And the next day, someone from the school where I teach music came to me and said, Jordan, how many people in your community were affected by the flood? I said, a lot of people. I said, is there any way that we can help? The kids at the school have raised a bunch of money and they brought in stuff. And I said, well, can we put together some relief supplies? We were able to assist 70 families with food and blankets, utensils, medical care, looking at 70 families right in our immediate community who had lost their homes. God is faithful to provide for all of our needs. So last year was flood. This year, where we're supposed to get rain from November until about April, we had 1 week of rain in December. Now, I'm sure some of you here have tried to plant or have been farmers at one point in your life, and you know how vital rain is. When you have weather that's between 30 and 45 degrees Celsius for months on end, and only 1 week of rain, your crops don't grow. It doesn't happen. So there is thousands and thousands of people in our community going hungry. And the World Food Program again came in and they were distributing food. But there was a lot of families that were left out. And so I prayed and I said, God, we need to do something about this. What can we do? Please, would you open up heaven and make a way for us to help the people in our community? We identified 100 families in our community that were headed up by widows or by disabled people, people that were just too elderly to be able to go out into the fields and work and replant their gardens. And we brought them to our feeding center because just a few days before, somebody at my church had said, Jordan, are there any hungry people in your community? And I said, there's lots of them. Well, my wife just raised $10,000 in Sweden to buy food for hungry people. Can you do anything? And we were able to buy food for 100 families. We increased that to 120 families this last month, getting people through famine because our God in heaven hears our prayers and answers them. In November, we're praying for rain to come in good time. We're going to help these families replant their gardens and try again. But in the meantime, I know that my Bible says, my God shall supply all my needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. I'm so excited because I'm seeing the impact of what we do. Now, a lot of what I do revolves around food. A lot of it, because children who are hungry do not do well at school. Now, I'm going to go back to my dream about vocational training for orphans. Starting up this feeding program in Malawi, I now have one student. He's gone into his second. He was 15 years old when he came to me as an orphan. He just finished his first year of medical school and he's starting his second year. I had the privilege of touring with him here in Canada for a few weeks in August while he told his story about how God has changed his life. I've got another one going to college in October to become a dairy farmer. There's another young man, he wanted to be a tailor. So we found those old Singer treadle sewing machines. I'm sure you've seen them. No electricity required, just your foot to go up and down. And he works day in, day out, sewing. He makes clothes, he makes bags, he makes computer bags and aprons and purses and school uniforms. And he's also taught another one of his friends how to do it. And the two of them sit there on their machines. I brought some of it with me. He makes 10% commission on everything I sell, and the rest of it goes to feed the kids. But he has lifted himself up. He's now old enough, he got married, he's got a kid, and he supports himself and his family. He's built himself a house, all because, as an orphan, he came to receive food. Two of the kids graduated from high school this year, and we have a rule. We say, before you go to university, we want you to work for at least 1 year and save a little bit of money towards your education. We'll cover the shortfall, but we want you to own your education. This one girl wants to be a nurse. Another young man, he wants to be a doctor. The businesses they start, they go to the farmers, the ones along the rivers, and they collect the rice that they grow. And they take the rice to the mill, they get it milled, and they sell it in the market. This was their idea. With the profits from their selling the rice, they bought some chickens and some more rice. And they're raising the chickens to sell the eggs, and then buy more chickens to sell more eggs. By the end of the year, they should have enough to pay for their first semester of college. It's very exciting. You have to understand, minimum wage in Malawi is, let me see, I have to do the math because of the exchange rate. 20,000 kwacha, so minimum wage is about $37 a month. $37 a month. The cost to go to school for a post-secondary student to become, say, a doctor is $1,000 per term, or per year. $1,000, no, they upped it again, $1,000 per term. So $2,000 a year. Now you tell me how somebody making $37 a month is going to pay $2,000 for school. It's not an easy thing. These kids are determined. And I looked at, and I had promised them 9 years ago, I said, if you work hard, I'll make sure you get into university. If you've got the marks, I'll find the money. We prayed, we said, God, I've got more and more kids graduating from high school. What are we going to do? Where's the money going to come from? Well, one of the banks in Malawi stepped up and said, can we pay your school fees this term? For all 350 kids, including the ones in university. They paid it all. Then there was a couple people here in Alberta that said, how much is it for university? And they've just paid the next 2 years for 2 of our students. God is so faithful. I'm watching him open up heaven and pour out blessings more than we can contain. I remember being brought to my knees at times, thinking, where am I going? Am I taking too much time? No, okay. Brought to my knees thinking, where is the money for all of this going to come from? But God is faithful. You tell me where else in the world you can look after 350 children on a daily basis for only $175,000 a year. That includes getting all their education, all their food, their health care, their clothes, the transport to get the food to the village, the insurance, the salaries. It's all covered for $175,000 a year. I started with a $12,000 a year budget underneath a tree. God is an amazing God. And I just have to give him all the glory, because he's the God who answers prayer. I'm going to sing a couple songs for you, if that's all right? This is one we sing at our church in Malawi. It's sung here in many churches as well. I'll start it in English and then I'll switch over. Stars, they wept. The morning sun was dead. the Savior of the world was fallen. His body on the cross, his blood poured out for us, the weight of every curse upon him. Final breath he gave, as heaven looked away, the Son of God was laid in darkness. A battle in the grave, the war on death was waged, the power of hell forever broken. The ground began to shake, the stone was rolled away. His perfect love could not be overcome. Now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King has rendered you defeated. Now forever he is glorified. Forever he is lifted high, and forever he is risen. He is alive. He is alive. Takai na kwerera, wala unachoka, chikondi chake si chita mgonja. Infambula yako, tono ilikuti, fumuyatu yaku, gonjeta muyaya ndiwo, tamandidwa, muyaya ndi, wokwezekerwa, muyaya ndi, womukandiwa moyo, ndiwa moyo. Now forever he's glorified. Forever he's lifted high, and forever he's risen. He is alive. He is alive. Timbe hallelujah, timbe hallelujah, timbe hallelujah, kosaya gonjitsa. Timbe hallelujah, timbe hallelujah, timbe hallelujah, kosaya gonjitsa. Oh, we sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah, we sing hallelujah, the Lamb is overcome. We sing hallelujah, we sing hallelujah, we sing hallelujah. Forever he is glorified, forever he is lifted high, and forever he's risen. He is alive. Muyaya ndiwo, tamandidwa, muyaya ndi, wokwezekedwa, muyaya ndi, womukandiwa moyo, ndiwa moyo. And now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King, he's overcome, he's overcome. Ule melelo wanu ukale tawi zonse mbuye kondwerani ndichitoza manjanu ule melelo wanu ukale tawi zonse mbuye kondwerani ndichitoya manjanu Dali di moyo, dita lemeketa nundi umuntu wangaonse, dita kuimbirani, dika dali di moyo, dita lemeketa nundi umuntu wangaonse. Let the glory of the Lord endure forever. Let the Lord be glad in his work.